By the decree of enforcing the institution of the papacy in violation of the law of God, our nation will disconnect herself fully from righteousness. When Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, when she shall reach over the abyss to clasp the hands with spiritualism, when under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan, and that the end is near.
I have two words for you: predator drones. You will never see it coming. You think I'm joking?
Yes, our president has a hit list of American citizens like you targeted for assassination. Now, I want you to imagine George W. Bush had a hit list of Americans targeted for assassination. This president does, and there are indications that the list of Americans targeted for assassination is growing. The CIA's list included 3 people, apparently, just a few months ago, but in a recent interview with the Washington Times, President Obama and his top terrorism advisor, John Brennan, said there are dozens of U.S. citizens around the world that are, quote, very concerning to the administration. But as Salon.com's Glenn Greenwald puts it, Brennan's statement suggests that the president's battlefield powers extend everywhere, even to places where there is actually no combat whatsoever. And joining us now, Salon.com's Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, how do you interpret this? I won't even subject you to a bunch of questions. If you look at this, is this as bad as it appears?
It's probably worse than it appears. I mean, look at the controversies that were created during the Bush administration when the president got caught spying on American citizens without warrants or trying to detain them without due process. Here you're talking about something far more extreme. You're talking about targeting American citizens for murder, for assassination, based merely on the allegation that they're involved in terrorism. No evidence, no charges, no trial, nothing. And it's extraordinarily dangerous, especially when you consider the fact that when allegations of terrorism by the government are subjected to judicial review, in overwhelmingly high percentages of the cases, 72%, courts find that the allegations are without merit. So who would ever justify allowing the president to target American citizens for assassination without any judicial oversight or charges or due process of any kind?
The Obama administration's acknowledged it's continuing a Bush-era policy authorizing the killing of U.S. citizens abroad. The confirmation came from Director of National Intelligence Dennis Blair in congressional testimony last week. Blair told the House Intelligence Committee U.S. forces can assassinate Americans believed to be involved in terrorist activity against the United States. Blair said, quote, being a U.S. citizen will not spare an American from getting assassinated by military or intelligence operatives overseas if the individual is working with terrorists and planning to attack fellow Americans. My first 2 guests have been among the most vocal critics of the continued assassination policy. Democratic Congressmember Dennis Kucinich joins us from Washington, D.C. Last week, he wrote a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder requesting an explanation of the Obama administration's legal basis for the extrajudicial killing of U.S. citizens. And we're joined on the telephone by Glenn Greenwald, a constitutional law attorney and political and legal blogger for Salon.com. He wrote a widely circulated piece for Salon last week called Presidential Assassinations of U.S. Citizens. Let's begin with Congressmember Dennis Kucinich. Explain what you wrote to Attorney General Holder.
Well, I think it's incumbent upon the Attorney General to explain the basis in law for such a policy. Our Constitution's Fifth Amendment, our Seventh Amendment, our 14th Amendment, all clearly provide legal protections for people who are accused or who would be sentenced after having been judged to be guilty. And what's happened is that the Constitution is being vitiated here. The idea that people are if their life is in jeopardy, legally have due process of law, is thrown out the window. And, Amy, when you consider that there are people who are claiming there are many terrorist cells in the United States, it doesn't take too much of a stretch to imagine that this policy could easily be transferred to citizens in this country. that only compounds what I think is a slow and steady detachment from core constitutional principles. And once that happens, we have a country then that loses its memory and its soul with respect to being disconnected from those core constitutional principles which are the basis of freedom in our society.
Good evening from New York. President Obama has reportedly authorized the death penalty for an American citizen who has not been convicted of any crime, the evidence against whom has yet to see the light of day, who denies his guilt, and who has not been given the due process, including trial, guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. It is a power not even claimed by the Bush-Cheney administration, extending far beyond Bush-Cheney claims, which even the most conservative Supreme Court justice rejected. Let's push the precedent here that would be set to its extreme. What is to stop a future administration from using that magic word terrorism to order that other American citizens should be killed for criticizing the government?
Well, I think that's the biggest question of all here, because what we have to do is think very big picture, whether you trust this government, this president, the last one, or the next one. The problem is we have already seen from the Bush administration their willingness to use the term terror and terrorism to justify warrantless wiretaps, torture, Guantanamo, and so many other things that were unconstitutional. And now you look at this and say, well, if we just slap terrorism on it, we can ignore 200 years of jurisprudence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My topic for this evening is assassinations. What have we allowed ourselves to become? Are we no longer a nation of laws? Have we become instead a nation of men who make secret arrests? Are secret prisons now simply another tool of the federal government law enforcement? Is secret rendition of individuals now permitted out of misplaced fear? Have we decided that the writ of habeas corpus is not worth defending? Is torture now an acceptable tool for making us safe? Unfortunately, the single answer to all of these questions from the leaders of our country and to many of our citizens appears to be yes. And now we are told that assassination of foreigners as well as American citizens is legitimate and necessary to provide security for our people. It is my firm opinion that nothing could be further from the truth. Secret arrests, secret renditions, torture, and assassinations are illegal under both domestic and international law. These activities should be anathema to the citizens of a constitutional republic. The real threat doesn't arise from our failure to torture. Rather, desensitizing our nation to the willful neglect and sacrifice of our civil liberties fought and died for over the centuries is the threat. The concept of habeas corpus existed even before King John of England was forced in 1215 by his rebellious barons to sign the Magna Carta. This basic principle and expression of individual liberty, which has survived 800 years, greatly influenced the writing of our Constitution and our common law heritage. Today, we hardly hear a whimper, either from the American people or a stone silent U.S. government as our cherished liberties are eradicated. Instead, we have a government that deliberately orchestrates needless fear and makes people insecure enough to ignore the reality of their lost liberties. The latest outrage is the current administration's acknowledgment that we now have a policy that permits assassination not only of foreign suspects, but of American citizens as well. Of course, the CIA has used secret assassinations in a limited fashion for decades, despite international, domestic, and moral law. When done secretly, as in the past, our government at least recognized that assassination was illegal and wrong. Frighteningly and astonishingly, however, the policy is now explicit. National Intelligence Director Dennis Blair, in open testimony before the House Intelligence Committee on February 3rd of this year, acknowledged that American citizens can indeed be assassinated at our government's discretion. The U.S. government attempted to assassinate Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen without even charging him with a crime. We're told this evidence is secret, that he does not deserve any constitutional rights, and that some unknown individual in the administration has the authority to declare him a threat, and therefore a legitimate target for assassination. Yes, I know he's probably a very bad person. Yes, I know that only a few Americans are on the assassination hit list. Yes, I know that artificially generated fear makes a large number of Americans inclined to applaud this effort, which supposedly will make us safe. But if this could become standard operating procedure and a permanent precedent is established, let me assure you that this abuse of the law will spread. It's time for Congress and the American people to wake up to the realities of the dangers we face. We must remember as members of Congress that we have taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. It should not be that difficult to distinguish the difference between the danger posed by the underwear bomber and the danger posed by a government that endorses secret prisons, torture, and assassinating American citizens. And I yield back the balance of my time.
In my country, a group of religious extremists are reshaping the government to promote their own agenda and morality.
The government can keep a list of everyone I call, and they do not need a judge's permission. Our citizens are seized and held in prison without being charged of a crime, without the right to a trial, and without a lawyer. Why should you care about what is happening to my country? Because my country is the United States of America.
When I was an officer, there still was something that we could coherently call a country based on our social and historical traditions. It doesn't exist anymore. I believe, and I'm going to say this, that the United States is in a process of rapid collapse as a democratic institution, and that a large part of its people, or most of its people, are suffering from some form of self-denial to the point that it's insanity. I think a lot of Americans have literally gone insane.
As they seek to track our location and place us on a database for every single thing, we have noted quite well that the papacy is instrumental in the destruction of freedoms for every person when it was under its Roman rule. Now with the massive propaganda that is instilled on the American people, they have been diluted and deceived into thinking that the system of our government is not in full control of the hierarchy of Rome. Just like evil Satan and his minions have controlled every aspect of what you watch, of what you hear, of what you sense as your perception of reality, it has been noted quite carefully that spiritualism has a major part to play in this system. So in the next broadcast, we will see of a certainty the power and manipulation of spiritualism.